was dealing in Psalm 46 may be different in terms of character and description, but the basic issue with which the psalmist is dealing is an issue with which we continue to deal even in our day. The issue is, how do you remain calm and cool and collected and confident in a time of crisis? We're not sure what the issues were with which the psalmist was dealing, whether it was a natural catastrophe or a national siege by an enemy. What is clear is that for the psalmist, it was a terrible, frightening kind of experience in which there was such a terrible storm that as he looked about, it seemed that the earth was changing. Mountains were being trembling in the midst of the billows and the roaring and the foaming of the sea. Nations were raging and kingdoms were tottering. It was not only a life but a creation-threatening event for him. So where do you turn in a time of crisis like that? One of the interesting things about reading and studying the Psalms is to see how the songwriters can focus and draw such dramatic attention on the specific issue with which they want to deal. They can bring it to a very high point, like the drama of a sea billowing and roaring and foaming, and then in the next verse he says, but there is a river, there's a quietness, there are streams which make glad the city of our God. An instrumental musician could certainly enjoy dealing with that psalm, to bring the music of the drama of the event into a great crescendo, and then silently hear again the sound of the flute and the strings. Such is the way of dealing with the crises of life, but also the confidence we can have in God. The only experience I've ever had with which I can most clearly identify with the psalmist was a time on a ship in the Aegean Sea. We encountered a violent storm. The ship was rolling and tossing. As you looked out, it seemed that the earth was shaking, mountains were trembling, the sea was certainly billowing and roaring and foaming. I went up into the bow of the boat as far as I could go to feel how the ship would rise up and then dive to the bottom of the ocean, it seemed, and the water would flow over us. It was awesome. And then almost as suddenly as the storm had come, it had gone. There was a quietness on the sea, a stillness. The ship in its steady roll allowed me to go to sleep. In such a situation, how do you move from fear to faith? How do you move from crying hysterically to confidence and hope? How do you move from the periphery of all that is going on around you to a center which is stable and serene and calm? Many of you likely have not had a kind of cataclysmic experience such as that described by the psalmist, or even one as threatening and exciting as the one I described. Yet many of you have, or you will have, an experience in life in which it feels like the earth is shaking. Life is threatened, at least as you've known life. And in those experiences, where do you turn? to find that stabilizing, serene center. Where do you go? This is why Psalm 46, along with Psalm 23, is one of the most loved of all the Psalms. It gives us direction. There is a word for us in the words of the psalmist. But first, get a feel of the rhythm of the psalm. Feel the beat, the movement, the flow. It begins by saying, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. That is a statement of faith and experience, not of conjecture. Confidence for a time of crisis comes through a faith which has already been established in the calmer, cooler times. There's not much benefit in trying to patch the roof when it's already raining. Faith is not like a fire extinguisher which you keep in a safe place only to be taken out in times of crisis. Faith is a journey of development, of trust, a development of a kind of assurance that the one who has promised to be there will be there because he loves you. It doesn't come through casual acquaintances. I'd find it extremely difficult for me to trust you with my life if I'd only heard about you and didn't really know you. So how do we move from that experience of having simply heard about God to the experience of knowing God and feeling that kind of confidence? Let the psalmist speak for God. Be still, he said, and know that I am God. Be still. Being still is not easy in our time, is it? By our own nature and by the nature of the rapid moving environment in which we live today, it is not easy to find a time and space or a place just to be still and quiet. We're more like joggers and runners who are trying to carry on a conversation with those who are running with us, which I was never able to do when I used to jog. I was just trying to get one foot in front of the other. But you can imagine how difficult it must be to be running and trying to carry on a conversation, to really get acquainted with someone and never being still long enough to have an intimate conversation. One of the mistakes I've made in my life, and I'm sure some of you have made it, is the assumption that in order to get more out of life, I've got to be involved in as many activities as possible, trying as many different and new things as I can try. What I discovered after a while is that my activities were interesting, but they were making me weary rather than making me feel fulfilled. I discovered that it was in the nurturing silence of those times when I was still and quiet and steady, away from the frantic frustration of the movement, that I also learned something very significant about myself, which was important to the fulfillment of life. Be still. It's not easy, is it? What would happen, though, if every morning, when you first get up, before you get involved in the activities and the agenda of your day, you would simply get out of bed, sit in a comfortable chair with both feet on the floor, your hands open and in your lap or on your knees, with your eyes closed, and you sat there for 5 quiet, still moments? Could you do that? Don't let anything from yesterday come into your thought today and stay there. Don't let anything you're about to do or plan to do come into your thoughts and stay there for a while. Just concentrate on just being still, being you. Gather yourself. Be calm. Be collected. for 5 minutes out of 1,444 minutes in every day, can't you be still long enough just to feel you? If you can't be still for 5 minutes to get centered and gathered and calm and the quietness, how do you expect to be centered and gathered and calm in the moving, noisy world into which you're about to go? Be still, he said. Be still and know. There's so much insecurity in the world today. One of the reasons for that insecurity is because we don't know and understand. We have more accumulated knowledge today than ever before in human history, but we're also more insecure. One of the reasons is because new knowledge has made old knowledge obsolete. And we haven't taken the time or don't have the interest of knowing as much as we should. I met a daughter recently who told me that her father had insisted that she learn something about the technology of stereophonic sound before he would ever allow her to put a tape or a disc into her new stereo system. He insisted that she learn something about the mechanics of an automobile before he would ever allow her to take driver training. That's strange, isn't it? It's different. It's different in this now generation in which we live, in which we want to try first and learn later, whether it is sex or stereo or whatever it is. And we wonder why we lack confidence when we get into a crisis. Be still, quiet, calm. Know yourself. Know your resources. Know your world and the issues you face. And it'll give you confidence. Of course, where the psalmist was leading is the last part of the sentence. Be still and know that I am God. You're not a God. Therefore, you were never intended to be sufficient unto yourself, to deal with either the joys or the troubles of life alone. Be still so that God can be present to you as you are willing to be present to yourself. If you are not fully in touch with yourself and present to you, how is it possible for anyone, including God, to be fully present so that you recognize the connection? Unless you are willing to take time to get centered and solid and calm and collected, how can you collect the energy that God has for you? God is able to do far more abundantly and exceedingly than you can even ask or imagine. But are you willing to wait and be receptive to that? The mystics call it practicing the presence of God. Just sitting still long enough to feel that there's someone, something else in there with you. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. But you have to be present to the presence. Martin Luther read that and wrote his great hymn, "A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing." And that's how he dealt with the many crises of his life, crises which were even a threat to his life and the sentence of death itself. But he said, I can trust God. Here I stand. God will help those who help him help them. There are times when God will help you as you help yourself. There are times and experiences and issues with which you must deal and which you can handle in your own strength, but there are other issues with which you must deal which you cannot handle in your own strength alone. It is in the stillness in which you wait and are calm and collected, that you also collect that strength which God has promised. Both by faith and by experience, those who have trusted God have discovered that He is able to do far more abundantly and exceedingly than we can even imagine. And what He's done for others, He can do for you. Several years ago, I had a devastating experience. I was just totally empty. I never came so close to despairing, not only for my life, but for my ministry. I couldn't sleep. I was sitting outside on my patio one night, 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, quiet and still. I didn't even try to pray because I didn't know what to say. I just sat there in a quiet silence. And a verse from the Psalm came to me, He restores my soul. And my faith said, that's right. That's not just general, that's for you. And I believed it, and I got up, and I went inside, and I went to sleep. Like the psalmist, I discovered that God is a refuge and a strength, a very present help in the time of trouble. He restored my soul. Be still. Be good to yourself. Get to know the God who already knows and loves you and has promised to be with you to help you in all of the experiences of life. Love yourself enough to accept God's love. And He who is faithful will make you a conqueror in His love. This is the victory that overcomes the world, John said, our faith. The capacity to remain calm, cool, collected, and confident in a troublesome world is not a matter of personality or of will. It is a byproduct of a faith which knows and is known and is willing to be still inside and serene, even in the midst of the noise and rapid movement of our world. God is with us. Lay claim to that. He's already claimed you. Let us pray. Oh God, in the calmness and quietness of our inner being, may we also remain steadfast, serene and sure in a time of crisis, because you are with us wherever we are. And give us then that victory